Okay, everybody, welcome to the Hard Sell with me, your host, Joel Stevenson. For those of you joining us for the first time, the idea of the show is whether or not you work as a salesperson, we all end up selling things ourselves, maybe our company or a car. There's all sorts of things that we end up selling over time. And our goal with this show is to help you win when sales opportunities present themselves by bringing leaders in the field together to share what works and what doesn't. And today we've got a great guest who knows a lot about a very important aspect of business that many of us probably don't think enough about. And we'll get more into that in a moment. But first, let me introduce him. Peter Zotto is the general manager of ProfitWell, which I'll have him talk a little bit more about when he introduces himself. And he's also the co-host of the Pricing Page Teardown series, which talks about what works and what doesn't work for web page pricing pages. Prior to ProfitWell, Peter was head of sales at Matchbox and also an analyst at OpenView, a great Boston-based venture capital firm. All right, Peter, welcome to the Hard Sell.
What's going on, Joel? Thanks for having me. Thanks for the
Thanks.
the nice intro.
Thanks for joining us. Great to chat with you again. Peter and I go a little ways back, and so hopefully this will seem conversational to those listening in. Peter, maybe just start by telling us a little bit more about ProfitWell and what you all do over there, and anything else that you think that it's important for us to know.
Yeah, sure. So ProfitWell, Boston-based company, focused pretty much entirely on revenue automation for the subscription economy, primarily through a few different products that we have. But we have a free financial metric platform that connects to a bunch of different billing systems out there like Stripe or PayPal or Braintree, Zora, etc. And we do a bunch of fun stuff around reducing churn, increasing activations, salvage offers for anything that's a sort of subscription offering. In addition to that, we also work on pricing and price optimization for subscription-based companies, so B2B, B2C, direct-to-consumer, e-commerce, media companies, and so forth. So, but primarily, it all comes down to how do we help companies grow faster through revenue automation within the subscription economy.
Right. Great. Yeah. And I guess in interest of full disclosure, we've been a customer of yours and got a lot of value out of it, and know a lot of other companies that have been really happy with working with you all. So, so let's talk a little bit about, we'll start with the subject of pricing. And what I thought might be interesting to delve into here is you've got kind of an interesting position where, on the one hand, you and your company are experts in pricing and what works and what doesn't. And, a lot of what's written, that's sort of easily accessible for folks is what companies should do, and how companies should handle pricing. But you also are responsible for revenue, and have a history in sales. And so I'm curious to delve into, some of these questions around, what should a salesperson do in a selling process in handling price? And maybe let's just sort of start with a scenario where, let's assume that, the prospect coming in maybe has some idea of what the price is, but we're not talking about a published price, where everything is sort of negotiated. So maybe just talk to me a little bit about, let's maybe start with the early part of the sales process, the first time that price comes up, and it often comes up, early in a selling process. Like, what's the right way to handle that as a salesperson, do you think?
And I'm sure you know this just as well as anybody else does, as Joel, and anyone who may be listening has heard this advice before. But I think transparency tends to lend itself pretty well in these conversations. I think more specifically, I don't think you should shy away from pricing when it comes up early in the conversation, but you need to understand, or on an individual level, it's really important to understand why people are asking about pricing early on in a conversation, because price, as Joel, and all of us as consumers have used as a sort of a blanket objection, right? Like, oh, this is too expensive, I'm just going to continue to look elsewhere. When the reality is, it may or may not actually be too expensive. And so I think what people who ask about price up front tend to miss is where the value of a product comes from. And so whether we're working with a company like Yesware or working with a company that sells coffee of the month, you got to figure out where the value is. And so when somebody asks for about price, it's okay to say, well, our prices are X to Y, or give them the actual number, but you want to sort of move quickly away from that, because all of a sudden, if you get stuck in the weeds of negotiating on a first or second call around price points without having actually either pitched the product or understood where the prospect's objections actually may be coming from, then it's going to be really hard to sell on value. And everybody should be striving to sell on value, whether you sell a widget or you sell a very complicated consulting agreement. So I think, to just sort of recap or to sum that up, what my point here is, one, it's okay to broach the subject of pricing quickly, and say, hey, our prices are X, or our prices are X to Y, or it depends on the following factors that go into building a pricing, rate for you. Be that as it may, let's talk a little bit about what's moving the needle for you, so we can understand what price looks like on your end, right? I think if you don't figure out where the value comes from, you're going to be negotiating against yourself, which is a particularly gnarly place for a rep to be in, or a seller to be in.
Right, right. And I know you guys are big believers in value-based metrics and thinking a lot about that. And so is the counsel for the salesperson to try to get to, hopefully your company has some notion of that. And if that's true, then like very trying to quickly zero in on what that is and understanding that, how that works in the customer's environment.
It is, in an ideal world, yeah, but I think the reality is sometimes the people who are in charge of pricing are often at the leadership level, and sometimes the decisions made at the leadership level and the rationale for those decisions don't necessarily trickle themselves all the way down to the folks that are in the field or on the phones or behind a computer answering questions to prospective clients. And so what you get is you get leadership. I pick on finance a lot, but you get the CFO who says, hey, our prices are going to be X or they're going to be Y, and we're really going to be focused on selling on value. But if he or she doesn't necessarily communicate where that value is supposed to be coming from, or what that perceived value actually is outside of the boardroom or the finance person's office, you put it in the hands of a seller to then come up with his or her own strategy. And that's not necessarily fair to the seller, because nine times out of 10, they're going to fall pretty flat because they don't have the support of marketing, they don't have the support of finance, or they don't have the support of the rest of the leadership team based on where that value actually comes from. So I think that, yes, if you're a seller, you want to sell on value, unless you are selling an entirely transactional product. I think most of us are in business to not sell transactional products. So I'd be hard pressed to find people listening to this are. But what I would tell you is, unless you're selling a transactional product, figure out what the value drivers are for people making a decision, why they're making that decision, what are the gaps that you're filling with your product that eases their decision, right? Is it making them more money? Is it driving more leads? Is it solving a particular pain point that they don't have to think about anymore? Is it providing a level of convenience? Those are the things that drive value for people, not necessarily price points.
Right, right, right. Yep. Yeah, that's well said. So all right, so then maybe let's keep pulling on this thread, and like now let's assume that we've made it past a first couple of meetings. We've got a prospect that's interested, and then we come to the it's the end of the month or the end of the quarter or even the end of the year, and so the prospect maybe knows sort of what the some of these games that get played, and says, okay, well, hey, like in exchange for me signing the paper before the end of the month, which I know helps you, like you need to, whatever you told me, it needs to be X% less, and if you can do that, then we're going to do the deal. What are your, I know that comes up all the time, every place I've ever been, on whether I'm buying or whether I'm selling, and so maybe talk about that a little bit.
It's a really good question. I think the hard part about this is, again, like I think that sellers are going to take the directive from management or leadership or whatever. I think it's unfair to say that salespeople are, and I hear this a lot, and I'm a salesperson myself, so I get semi offended by this, but I hear a lot like, oh, salespeople are coin operated. I think that's unfair because, perhaps 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago, whatever it was, that may have been the case. But I think the rise of sort of the information economy with the internet has created pretty smart, informed buyers. So to suggest that salespeople are coin operated, I think is somewhat of a misnomer at this point. But be that as it may, the reason I bring that up is because, look, at the end of the day, salespeople want to achieve a quota, or they want to achieve success, and often the vehicle to success can be quota attainment. If you have, if you don't have, we've worked with a myriad of companies that are sort of like Wild West in terms of what their discount strategy is, not just at the end of the month, but all the time. You need to have a really vetted discount strategy. And it can be as simple as we never negotiate below a 10% discount or above a 10% discount. So no matter what the prospect says, no matter what time of the year, month, day, or week it is, we will never do more than 10%. We work with companies that have reps can give up to 5%, managers, frontline managers can give 10, VPs can give 15, CEO or CFO can give 20 or more percent. Those are also fine. I think everybody knows that at the end of a particular quarter, everybody's a bit more, there's a bit more incentive to get a deal done. So I think that if you go into the end of the quarter with that mentality, and it's important for the business to get a deal done at the end of the quarter, so be it. If you're willing to lower the price point a little bit more than what you agreed on, I don't think you need to lose sleep over that. At the same time, I think you need to stick to your guns when it's, when you don't necessarily need to discount, because what we see time and again is that once you've discounted, you start to erode LTV or lifetime value of that product. Because when it comes time for a renewal, that renewal or that customer is going to expect the renewal price to be the exact same as the discounted initial price. And now you can't upgrade them at the sort of the MSRP or the list price, which is an unfortunate happening based on discounting more than you agreed to. So I think the last point I would make is, if all else being equal, try to stick to your guns. Don't necessarily discount further than you agreed to. If you do, make sure you get something in return. And I think this is pretty accepted advice, right? There's gives and gets in sales. And so if someone's going to give you a bigger discount than they initially agreed on, like, what are you going to give them as a prospect? Whether it's, can you be a referenceable customer? Can you provide a case study? Can you make an intro to somebody else in your network? Like, those things are also worth dollars. So try to push on that as well, but don't just give a massive discount at the end of the month without getting anything in return.
Yeah. I totally support all of those points. One thing I've wondered a little bit about, and I'm trying to think of an example of a company that's done this. Maybe Atlassian is one, where there basically either isn't a discount that's there's just no discounts that happen, or there's sort of a published schedule that is sort of discoverable on a website where the rep has no ability to change price. The rep's job is really there to coordinate the company resources to try to make sure that the business questions are answered, to in a world where there's customizations or professional services, make sure all that stuff sort of gets coordinated. But really do the consultative sale without price is an element of that. I mean, I've wondered as the world becomes more transparent, as buyers become more informed, if that might be something that actually ends up empowering sales. But I don't know to what extent it's really been tried, or if you've seen it or have any experience with that as a concept.
I mean, I think it's a really good point. It's sort of like, I would probably peel this a layer like deeper or go back one step, which is to say, like, when you're building your pricing strategy, you have to also think about who do you want to be as a company. We work with a myriad of companies that I think struggle with, are we a premium brand? And if so, how does our discounting strategy play into that? Are we a discount brand? And if so, how does our pricing strategy play into that? And we've all seen this in our consumer lives, right? Like, I think everybody would agree that products like Apple, at least by and large, are accepted as premium products. And as such, it's very rare that Apple has a sale. In fact, I think they have a sale one time a year, and it's the upcoming Cyber Monday or Black Friday sale, right? And it's like the max they go is 10% off a whole bunch of products, but it doesn't include iPhones. Same with products like Lululemon on the consumer side, right? Like, they typically don't have traditional sales. What they'll have is a "we made too much" rack, and it's all the surplus product, but they don't really call it a sale because they're a premium brand. They don't want to look like it. But if you look at, on the flip side, you look at companies like Old Navy or JCPenney, or those in that world, they have a sale every other day. And it's fine because it works for them and their investors and their market. But it's, you got to figure out who you want to be when you grow up when it comes to your pricing strategy. So I think that's important. I think it's okay when you remove the idea of, in a sales process, that the salesperson, if you're a buyer, that the salesperson who's selling to you is just trying to take something from you, which is your budget or your money, and you can take that away as much as possible. you end up in a better place, right? Because now you're not necessarily fighting against somebody who just wants your money and you don't really believe in that they have your best interest in mind. Do so, but it's a delicate balance of what type of a company do you want to be, and as such, like how do you want to empower your salespeople? We have a philosophy at ProfitWell that is we deploy advisory-driven sales, and part of being an advisory-driven sales team means that our first instinct is to provide value and help people. Our second or third instinct is to get a deal done. And if we can't get a deal done, we still provide value. And we try very hard to maintain that. And sometimes that means, we offer competitors products before ours because it's a better deal for them, or it's a better fit. But I think that's something that took us a long time to come to terms with.
Yep. Okay. So maybe going back to something you said a little bit earlier. So let's say I'm a rep, and I'm on the end of corporate decisions that are now impacting me and maybe putting me in a less than desirable position when it comes to doing some of these pricing conversations. And I maybe recognize that things are not as good as they could be, and I want to provide some feedback up to the organization so that we can all do better. Like, what are some things that you've seen, or maybe put another way, like what is feedback that's a rep could give to say, hey, here's a really good example of somebody doing it right, or the counter example of like, hey, here's an example of like somebody that's doing it wrong, and that's kind of what we're doing, and like we should instead sort of do it this other way. Any like content you guys have done or thoughts or around that?
I want to give the best. Joel, do you mind just repeating the question, the first part of that question, just so I give you the right example?
Yeah, so I'll try to distill it and not ask such a long rambling one.
Okay.
But the basic idea is, if I'm a rep and I'm consistently feeling like I'm on the short end of pricing conversations with my company, and I think that part of the reason is because of the way our company presents itself in the world, whether it's on the website or through other means. Like, what is feedback that I could give upwards to try to have the company achieve sort of a better result by the time a prospect shows up in my sales funnel?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's a tricky one. I don't know if I have the perfect answer because I think after, we've been doing this almost 10 years now, the pricing work. And I think, unfortunately, I think a lot of leadership teams that are tasked with building pricing strategy don't do customer research and they don't do market research. What they'll do is they'll run a bunch of numbers in a spreadsheet. They'll talk to the team internally, right? Their strategy team or the pricing committee, which is fine, but they don't look externally from that committee. So they don't take input from the sales team. They don't take input from not yet customers, but people that look like customers, right? ICPs or what have you. And so they come up with a strategy that looks great on paper, but that the sales folks can't necessarily execute, no matter how good the product is, right? An example that I use all the time is, you either have on one end of the spectrum, you have a product that feels like it's a great fit, but it's so inexpensive, you start to question the quality. Like, can this really do what it's saying that it can do? Because it's so cheap. There's no way that this is going to be worth it, right? It's going to be broken, or it's going to be poorly made, et cetera, right? If somebody offered you a Ferrari, for instance, they said this will be yours for $10,000, you'd look at them and like they were crazy, because there's no way a Ferrari is going to cost $10,000. On the flip side, you have products that are so insanely expensive that, again, like, it doesn't matter how amazing it is, it's just so prohibitively too high that people can't get the budget, right? And again, like, if someone said, hey, here's a Toyota Camry, I'm going to charge you $100,000 for this Toyota Camry, you'd be like, look, there's no way I'm going to pay $100,000 for a Toyota Camry. It's not going to fly, both literally and figuratively. So why I tell you that is that if you're a salesperson and you're stuck in a situation where you feel like you've got great feedback from the front lines of prospects declining to purchase your product because of price, what I would suggest that he or she does is figure out not the lever of price point that's going to get them to buy, but what are the value drivers of that price point? For instance, right, if I don't know if this is, the example is going to die on a vine here, but if we're talking about cars, right, Camrys or Ferraris, do they care about the fact that it's 4-wheel drive or 2-wheel drive? Do they care about the fact that it's, got great heated seats, or do they care about the fact that it's convertible? These are things that drive value for individual buyers or companies. And if a company who's building a pricing strategy doesn't have that information at hand, or they haven't thought about it, and it doesn't matter how they price, they're going to come up short because they're not focused on what are the things that drive value. So if I'm a rep or I'm an individual frontline seller, which we all have been or are, one of the things that I try to do all the time is, okay, you're not going to buy. Tell me why. What is it why is this too expensive? Or why is this too cheap? Is it because we didn't offer X or Y functionality? And if so, if I did, could I get you to commit to a longer, an actual deal or a longer term deal? Because then I can take that back to my team on the strategy side and say, look, if we add these things or we strip these things, this type of prospect is going to purchase 9 times out of 10.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And I would just maybe add, in sort of this world of remote selling that we're now in, where a lot of things are done via video and a lot of video is recorded, to the extent that you can capture that part of the conversation and send it along to people. Yeah. Like I've found that to be very effective over time, like being on the sort of sending it or being on the receiving end of that. It's like when you hear the customer say it in their own words, it sometimes can be a little bit more powerful than an email that says, hey, I just got off the phone with this customer and they believed XYZ thing. And so we lost the deal because of, whatever function. So I think that's, to the extent that you have those tools, can be a really powerful way to leverage them.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think the sales folks have a very difficult job, not just because they're expected to close business and provide revenue for the company, but also because they are quite literally the closest people often to the customer or the market. And I think that is often an overlooked function by the greater, sort of the larger parts of the organization or leadership teams at sort of most companies we deal with. A lot of salespeople get great market information, both from buyers and non-buyers, and it's rare that that's tapped into. And when it is, we see really, really smart go-to-market teams utilize that information as a way to either predict what to build next in the product, how to market better, who the real buyer personas are, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's just a missed opportunity that companies don't do that.
Yeah. Makes sense for sure. Yeah, at Yesware, we're a little bit unique in the sense that our sellers have that information, but they're also the target customer as well. And so it's, I've seen product teams sometimes struggle with that because there's a little bit of like, okay, we're getting this information, but how much of that can be translated into, what's, the rest of the world? Is it just us? So that's again where I've seen like, where it ends up being successful, where there's a lot of like good examples and evidence that the sales team is bringing to support their case. And hopefully whoever's making the decisions is listening to those teams and getting better as a result.
Yep. So, yeah, 100%. Yep.
All right. Well, Peter, it's been great chatting. I think what we'll do, we tend to open this up for questions. I don't know if there are going to be any. But if there are any from the audience, just let us know, and we'll bring you up on stage. If not, then we will let you get back to conquering the world one subscription company at a time.
Nice.
All right, I'm not seeing anything. So I guess we will let you go. But appreciate you taking out some time to join the show today, and best of luck with what you guys are working on there. And maybe I understand there's a ProfitWell van touring the country, and so if it shows up in your town, you go say hello.
No worries. Thanks, Joel, and best of luck to you. And I hope this was valuable on some level.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. Bye.